Hello, this is Brian. Welcome back to my garage. Let's make a video today on improving the trigger pull on an old Benjamin C series pellet rifle. This is a 5mm 20 caliber rifle. It's pretty easy to make changes to the trigger pull to make the trigger a little bit easier to pull. Of course, this improves the accuracy of the air rifle. So let's get started. Here's the information on the gun. I'll pause here for a second so you can read it. Then I'll show you how to get the trigger mechanism out, how to take the gun apart. It's really easy and you don't need any special tools whatsoever. Here's the rifle sitting on my workbench. The first thing you have to do is take the stock off. And there's a Phillips screw right here. I used a number 3 Phillips screwdriver because it's a pretty big head on the Phillips screw. And when working on guns, it's always important to use screwdrivers that fit. Then, when the stock is off, one screw it comes off, you have to loosen up this nut. This is also where the screw that holds the stock on goes, kind of a clever design. And it takes an 11mm wrench. Everything's going to be metric on this gun, of course. And you don't have to take the nut off, you just loosen them up. Then right here, on both sides, there's a small Phillips screw. Just use an ordinary screwdriver, and then this is the trigger mechanism. It'll slide right out. This is just a cover. I have the mechanism actually on the other bench. But that's all there is to taking this gun apart. So far, there really isn't anything that can go wrong. So don't be afraid to do it. Now on this particular gun, some of you will probably also notice I have some homemade scope mounts on this, but we're not going to talk about that. So step one, get the trigger mechanism out. The trigger mechanism has 2 screws holding the cover on. Just use a regular screwdriver that fits the screws well, and then just gently take the cover off and get them out of the way. And I'll focus here a little bit on the trigger mechanism in case you take yours apart and it flies apart. Here's how it all goes back together. It's pretty simple. Here are the tools that I'm going to use. I just have a small stone. It's a real fine stone. I have some 800 grit sandcloth, or some, that wet dry. We're going to hone a few areas on here, and I'll show you the areas that we're going to hone smooth. Then also we're going to talk about the spring. The spring has a lot to do with the trigger pull, and we're going to replace the spring. And I'll talk you through that in a little bit on what spring we're going to use. But let's start talking about what points we're going to hone smooth on this mechanism. I'm not really going to file anything down. I'm just going to polish some areas. Look where the trigger rubs on the housing. You can see that silver area right there. And I've already kind of polished that smooth with a little stone. Just remove the roughness in the casting. And also, I deburred this edge. Just kind of radius the edge with the stone. Also, where the barrel, there's a locking mechanism. It rides on this casting. It rubs on the casting. That casting's pretty rough. And that causes friction. So I use the stone. I just use my stone. Put it in here like that, and just rubbed it a little tiny bit. Not so much to remove material, just to flatten it out. And then I radiused the edges. I also radiused the edge. You can see where I radiused the edge. Just take that. It's a stamped piece, and you have to take the burr off. On this mechanism, there's a pin here and a pin there. They will need to be cleaned and lubricated. This mechanism was pretty dirty. I've already cleaned it. But I haven't lubricated anything yet, and I don't really know yet what I'm going to use, oil or grease. But here's what we want to talk about. See, this is a flat spot right here on this kind of gold part, and you'd be surprised how rough that was, because that's just stamped out, and the burr was still on it. And I'll take this trigger out here and show you how I cleaned up the burr. And this piece has a little knob on it to reduce friction. And that had a little wear on it, and I polished that smooth too. Let me stop the video here for a second and take this apart, and I'll show you how I polished that. Okay, I simply pulled the trigger mechanism up from the pin, and let's zoom in here. See that round area? That's what actually slides on this flat spot. And you can see, I'll try focus, there was a little, that's probably about the best I can do. There was just the tiniest wear right there. And I smoothed that out. I didn't remove anything with a file or a grinder. I just polished it smooth with that sand cloth. This thing, where that rubs, let me see if I can't stand them up a little bit here. I'm gonna try move in. There. That was really rough from how they stamped it. In fact, you can see the flash. You see right there, that that flash that's on there, that burr, that was on that surface too. Let the phone focus here. Not only did I radiused it, and I polished it up with that sand cloth. It's super smooth now. And of course, that'll get some sort of lubrication as well. But this part is what really needed to be cleaned and to remove that burr, because that burr was actually riding on this mechanism. That made it unsmooth, and then the trigger rubbing on this rough casting here and up here, that didn't help matters either. And probably the fact that these pins weren't lubricated didn't help either. Let me put this back together now. Let's talk about this spring. There are some other excellent videos on YouTube about this mechanism. And they talk about what this spring does. And the spring doesn't really do anything for the trigger pull because you have the safety spring. But this spring is also in there. For reasons I don't know, other people on other YouTube channels have suggested even removing the spring. I don't really want to do that, but I'm going to put a lighter spring in. And here's what I'm going to do. Here's the original spring that was in the gun. And I assume it's the original. And it's an 8mm by 20mm spring. I have a fairly good spring collection. And here's the spring I'm going to use. This is a 3/8 OD spring. It's 5/8 of an inch long. And it doesn't have as much tension in it as the Benjamin Sheridan spring. This is a softer spring. Here's something similar, a part number from something similar. This is 3/8, but it's 1 7/8. Now I'm using 5/8, so I don't know the exact part number, and it's 0.025 wire diameter. But this is the exact spring, I had two of them, that I'm going to use. And the spring fits in there so nice. I don't know if I can demonstrate the trigger. I don't want it to all fall apart. But that's really nice and smooth, and that's significantly lighter trigger pull than what I have. And see how that rounded bull nose slides on there? And it slides nice now that burr. Oh, it fell apart. Did you see that? It just snapped out. The pin came out. That's no big deal. So I got to quit pulling on the trigger. So those are the points that I'm going to I'm going to polish, and that's the spring that I'm going to change. Let me put it back together. There's the mechanism once again. Now I don't know what I'm going to do for lubrication. I haven't figured it out yet. But I know this pin needs to be lubricated. This will certainly get grease. I'll put a little layer of grease on here. This pin certainly needs to be lubricated. And I don't know if I'm going to put any lubricant where that slides on the casting. I don't think so, because that'll just attract dirt on both the top and the bottom. I'm just going to I use the stone and just cleaned off the high spots. But I'm going to lubricate this with oil or grease. I'm going to grease this, and I'm going to oil this. And then I'm going to put it all back together. And I can see already that the pull is far less than what it was. And that's because of deburring and changing that spring. So I'm going to put, the spring fell out, but that's okay. I'm going to put it all back together now. I'll stop the video and put it back together. But this is how you can take this mechanism apart. It's a really well-designed mechanism. And it's fairly simple to work on. And it's going to make quite a bit of difference. Well, thank you for watching my video. If you have a Benjamin air rifle and want to improve the accuracy of it, you might take this trigger mechanism apart, clean it up, lubricate it, polish it, maybe change that spring, and improve the accuracy of your rifle. Once again, thank you, and we'll see you later.